Hello, I have read stories like mine before, stories about betrayal, about people who got played, people who didn't see it coming. And I always thought, that would never be me. I was wrong. That my wife, Rachel, and I have been married for 6 years. We met in college, clicked almost instantly, and everything fell into place from there. She was beautiful, charismatic, and could talk her way out of anything. She had this confidence about her, the kind that made you believe in her, no matter what. Maybe that should have been a red flag. The first few years of our marriage were good. Not perfect, but good. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but I never doubted that we were in it together. At least, I thought we were. A few months ago, things started to feel different. It was subtle at first, so small that I ignored it. She was on her phone more than usual, but that was normal, right? Everyone is glued to their phones these days. She started dressing up more often, doing her makeup even when she was just going to the store. Again, not something I thought too much about. But then, she started going out more. She had never been the type to go out late. She liked our quiet nights at home, watching TV, making plans for the future. But suddenly, she was always out. She started taking Ubers everywhere. That was the first thing that really stuck out to me. We have 2 cars. She had no reason to be calling Ubers at all. At first, she said she was drinking with friends and didn't want to drive. Fine. That made sense. But then it became a regular thing. She would tell me she was meeting a friend for lunch, and I would see her ordering an Uber instead of just taking her own car. I asked her about it once, jokingly. Why are you wasting money on Ubers when your car is right there? She laughed it off, told me I was overthinking, said she just liked the convenience. And I believed her. Or at least, I tried to. Then there were the mood swings. One day she would be overly sweet, acting like nothing was wrong. The next day, she would be distant, irritated, snapping at me over the smallest things. She would pick fights over nothing, then storm out of the house, phone in hand, ordering another Uber to clear her head. I started noticing other things. She would get home and immediately take a shower. Not just a quick rinse, but long showers, sometimes twice a day. She changed her passwords on everything. Her phone was always face down, always locked, always just out of reach. One night, she came home late, claiming she had been out with her friends. She smelled like men's cologne. It wasn't mine. I asked her about it. She rolled her eyes and said I was imagining things. That was when I knew something was off, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. I wasn't ready to admit to myself that my wife, the woman I had built my life with, was lying to me. So I did what most people do when they don't want to believe the truth. I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I convinced myself that she wouldn't do this to me. But deep down, I already knew something was happening, and I was about to find out exactly what it was. I spent weeks trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. I told myself that Rachel was just going through a phase, that maybe she was stressed, maybe she was trying to feel younger, maybe I was reading too much into things. But no matter how much I tried to push it aside, the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. It was there every time she walked past me with her phone glued to her hand, every time she came home late and went straight to the shower, every time she smiled at me like nothing was wrong while I felt the ground shifting beneath me. It was the kind of feeling that keeps you up at night, the kind that eats at you slowly, making you question everything you thought you knew. I started paying more attention. Not outright snooping, just observing, noticing patterns, keeping track of the little things. She had stopped letting me touch her phone at all, even for something as simple as playing music or checking the time. She had a second email account, one I had never seen before, and whenever she got a notification from it, she would swipe it away so fast you would think it was on fire. Her wardrobe had changed too. She had always taken care of herself, but now it was different. She wasn't dressing up for me anymore. It wasn't like before when she would ask if I liked her outfit, when she would put on perfume and smile when I noticed. Now, She barely acknowledged my existence before walking out the door looking like she was going on a date every time she left the house. And then, of course, there were the Ubers. She took them everywhere now, even when there was no logical reason for it. I checked the bank statements, and the transactions were almost daily. She was spending money on rides to places she never told me about, rides that didn't match the time she said she was out with friends. It wasn't just the money that bothered me. It was the secrecy, the lies I hadn't fully uncovered yet but could feel wrapping around me like a tightening rope. Then, one evening, something happened that made everything snap into focus. She had left the house in a hurry, barely saying a word to me, claiming she was meeting a friend for dinner. I had been watching her more closely lately, not out of paranoia but out of necessity. I needed to know the truth, and if she wasn't going to give it to me, I had to find it myself. I opened the Uber app on my own phone and did something I had never done before. I requested a ride history report linked to our shared bank account. The records came in almost instantly, a long list of rides stretching back months, each one a small betrayal written in digital ink.at. First, nothing stood out, just random trips all over the city. But then I noticed a pattern. The same pickup and drop-off locations, repeated over and over again, sometimes multiple times a week. Some of them made sense: restaurants, shopping centers, places she could have plausibly gone with friends. But one address showed up too many times, one I didn't recognize. It wasn't a bar, wasn't a mall, wasn't anywhere she had ever mentioned going. I copied the address and pasted it into my Maps app. My stomach dropped when I saw what it was. A residential apartment complex on the other side of town, far from any of her usual hangouts, far from any of her so-called friends. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she had a friend who lived there, maybe she was helping someone with something, maybe this was all one big misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. I had known for a while, even if I didn't want to admit it. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't something I could rationalize away. Rachel was lying to me. She was sneaking off to this apartment over and over again, using Ubers so I wouldn't see her car parked there, covering her tracks just enough to make sure I never put the pieces together. But she had underestimated me. I wasn't going to confront her yet. I wasn't going to ask her who lived at that address because I already knew she would lie. She had been lying for months. Why would she stop now? I needed more. I needed to be sure. I needed to catch her in a way that left no room for denial, no way for her to twist things around and make me the bad guy. Because I knew Rachel. If I accused her now, she would turn it around on me. She would tell me I was paranoid, that I was controlling, that I was making something out of nothing. She would make me question myself the way she had been doing all along. So I waited. I kept watching, kept gathering evidence. I became the quiet observer in my own marriage, taking note of every lie, every excuse, every little detail that didn't add up. It was exhausting, pretending like everything was normal, smiling at her like I didn't know she was lying to my face, listening to her tell me she loved me while knowing she was running off to be with someone else. Then, a week later, I got the final confirmation I needed. She was in the shower when her phone lit up on the nightstand. I wasn't looking for anything, wasn't trying to invade her privacy, but when I glanced over, I saw the notification. It wasn't from a name I recognized, just an unknown number. But the message was enough to make my blood turn to ice. Same time tomorrow? It wasn't a question. It was a routine. A pattern. A meeting that had already been decided before she even stepped into that shower, and that was when I knew for certain. My wife was cheating on me. I didn't know with who yet. I didn't know why. But I knew where it was happening. And I was going to find out exactly what she had been hiding. That I was done waiting, that I was done pretending, that I was about to tear her lies apart, piece by piece, until she had nowhere left to hide. That I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Rachel was curled up beside me, breathing evenly, completely unaware that I knew. Or maybe she knew and just didn't care. Maybe that was the worst part, realizing that she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She thought she had covered her tracks well enough. She thought I would never figure it out. But she had underestimated me. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan. I wasn't going to accuse her outright. That would be pointless. I had seen enough stories like mine to know how this played out. If I confronted her now, she would deny everything. She would call me crazy, tell me I was paranoid, flip the blame onto me. No, I needed to catch her in a way that left no room for doubt. She had her routine now. The Ubers, the fake excuses, the unexplained absences. The message from the unknown number had confirmed it. She was meeting someone regularly. And I knew exactly where. So I waited. I pretended everything was normal, just like she had been doing to me for months. I kissed her goodbye, told her to have a good day, watched as she got dressed up like she was going on a date instead of running a simple errand. She left the house at her usual time, phone in hand, already calling for her Uber. I followed her. I had never done something like this before. The thought of tailing my own wife made me sick to my stomach, but I had no other choice. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed undeniable proof. So I waited until her Uber arrived, then got into my car and followed from a distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. She didn't go to lunch with a friend. She didn't go shopping. She didn't even go anywhere remotely justifiable. She went straight to the apartment complex. The same one from the Uber history. The one she had been visiting over and over again. I parked down the street, heart pounding in my chest, watching as she stepped out of the car, looked around briefly, and then walked up to the building's entrance like she had done this 1,000 times before. I watched as she pulled out her phone and sent a quick message. A few seconds later, the door buzzed open, and she disappeared inside. I felt sick. It was real now. There was no misinterpretation, no second guessing. My wife had been lying to me. She had been sneaking off to this place, meeting someone, hiding something from me for who knows how long, and I was going to find out exactly who it was. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. My entire body was buzzing with rage, with betrayal, with the sickening realization that the person I had trusted most had been living a double life. I wanted to storm inside, rip open the door, catch her in the act right then and there. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed to be smart. I needed to be patient. I took a deep breath, got out of my car, and walked toward the entrance. The building wasn't fancy, just a standard apartment complex, nothing special. But it was special to her. Special enough that she kept coming back here. I checked the intercom system, looking at the names listed for each unit. None of them stood out. None of them meant anything to me. Then I saw it. One of the units had no name attached. Just a blank space. A nameless door in a building full of strangers. I knew that was it. I waited. Another 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Finally, the door buzzed again, and Rachel stepped out. She was adjusting her hair, smoothing out her clothes, looking around like she was making sure no one had seen her. I stepped back, staying out of sight, heart hammering in my chest as I watched her walk back toward the street, phone in hand, ordering another Uber. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look nervous, she looked satisfied. That was the moment I knew. She had done this before. So many times that it wasn't even a secret to her anymore. She had gotten comfortable in her deception, confident that I would never find out. I let her go. I could have confronted her right there. Could have called her name, watched the shock wash over her face. But I didn't. Because I still didn't know who she was meeting. And I wasn't leaving without that answer. So I waited. Again, and then, finally, the door buzzed open one more time. A man stepped out, not just any man. Uber driver. I recognized him instantly. I had seen him before, dropping her off at our house, always so polite, always so professional. He had picked her up so many times that I had stopped noticing. He had been right there the whole time, in plain sight, and I had never even suspected it. I felt a cold wave of realization crash over me, Rachel hadn't just been using Ubers to hide where she was going. She had been using them to meet him. This wasn't just some random fling. It wasn't some mistake. She had chosen him, over me, over our marriage, over everything we had built together. I stood there, watching as he got into his car, completely unaware that I was only a few feet away, watching his every move. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look guilty. He looked like a man who had just gotten exactly what he wanted, and that was when I knew that I wasn't just going to confront Rachel, that I was going to burn everything she had built to the ground. She thought she had control, she thought she was untouchable, but she had no idea what was coming next. That I stood there watching as her Uber driver got into his car and pulled away, completely unaware that I had just pieced together the truth. My wife had been sneaking around with him, using his job as a cover, using the rides as a way to slip away from me, using our home as nothing more than a pit stop between her double life. And she had done it so many times that it was now second nature to her. This wasn't some impulsive mistake, some moment of weakness. No, this was planned, calculated, executed so well that she had convinced herself I would never catch on. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay in control. I had the proof I needed, but that wasn't enough. I wasn't going to storm home and start shouting accusations. That was what she would expect. That was what she was hoping for. Because if I lost my temper, if I went in blind with nothing but anger, she would have the upper hand. She would twist the narrative, turn the tables, make me look like the unreasonable one. No, I needed to be smart. I needed to let her walk right into this without realizing what was waiting for her on the other side. I got back in my car, my hands still trembling, my pulse still hammering in my skull. My body was vibrating with something too intense to name: rage, betrayal, maybe even relief. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined this, that my instincts had been right all along. But knowing the truth didn't make it hurt any less. If anything, it made it worse. Because now, every memory I had of Rachel felt like a lie. Every time she had kissed me goodbye before leaving for one of her secret meetups. Every time she had texted me, pretending like she was just out running errands while she was actually wrapped up in another man's arms. Every time she had told me she loved me, while knowing full well that she was giving her time, her body, her affection to someone else. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront her yet. I wasn't going to let her know I had been watching. No, I was going to wait for the perfect moment, the moment when she felt the safest, the most in control. That was when I would strike. That was when I would rip her lies apart and leave her with nothing. She wasn't home yet, of course. She wouldn't be home for another 30 minutes, just enough time for her to clean herself up, to wash away any trace of what she had just done, to rehearse whatever excuse she would give me for why she had been gone so long. I walked inside and sat down in the living room, my mind racing. I could have checked her phone, gone through her messages, dug even deeper into her betrayal, but I didn't need to. I had seen enough. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I could stomach reading her words to him. Seeing how she spoke to him, seeing if she called him the same pet names she had once used for me. Seeing if she had ever told him she loved him. The front door opened, and I heard her footsteps before I saw her. The way she sighed dramatically, like she had just had the longest day ever. The way she tossed her keys onto the counter like nothing was wrong. She walked into the room, smiling at me, the same practiced, effortless smile she had probably given him earlier. She looked fresh, put together, like a woman who had just left a business meeting instead of crawling out of a stranger's bed. And that made my stomach turn because now I knew. I knew what was behind that smile. I knew what she had been doing before she walked through that door. I knew that her lips had been on someone else, that her hands had been touching someone else, that everything about her, from the way she carried herself to the perfume lingering in the air, wasn't for me. That I forced myself to stay calm. I looked at her, nodded, acted like nothing was wrong. And she bought it. Of course, she did. She was too confident, too convinced that she had me fooled. She kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, not even noticing the way I stiffened under her touch. Then she started talking about her day, telling me half-truths, mixing just enough reality into the lie to make it sound believable that I just listened, that I let her spin her web, I let her dig herself deeper, and the whole time, I was planning exactly how I was going to destroy her. I sat there, watching her, listening to every word that came out of her mouth, knowing that every single one of them was a lie. Rachel carried herself with the same casual ease as always, walking into the house like she wasn't hiding something, like she wasn't stepping out on our marriage. She spoke about her day as if it had been nothing more than another afternoon, giving me vague details about errands she never ran, about people she never saw. She even threw in a few little frustrations about traffic and how exhausting it had been running around. I wanted to laugh. Traffic. Right. She hadn't been stuck in traffic. She had been in that apartment, wrapped up in someone else's arms, doing things I couldn't even let myself think about without feeling sick. She was a good liar. I would give her that. But now that I knew the truth, I could see the cracks in her performance. The way she over-explained things that didn't need explanations. The way she spoke too quickly, as if trying to get the details out before I had the chance to question them. The way she avoided my eyes just enough to make it seem natural but not so much that it raised suspicion. She had been practicing this for a long time, fine-tuning her deception to the point where she had convinced herself she was untouchable. And maybe she had been until now that I didn't interrupt her. I let her talk, let her dig herself deeper. I nodded along, acted interested, even threw in a few little questions just to see how quickly she could fabricate answers. She didn't hesitate. She had rehearsed all of this in her head long before she ever stepped through that door. She had probably been preparing for this conversation while she was still with him, planning out her alibi in case I asked too many questions. That I looked at her and wondered how many times she had done this. How many times she had come home from seeing him and sat across from me, smiling, lying, pretending like she was still my wife. How many times she had kissed me goodnight after spending the day with him. How many times she had sent me sweet messages while she was in his car, in his bed, in his arms. The thought made my stomach churn, but I kept my face neutral. I wasn't going to let her see what I knew. Not yet. She finished her story with a sigh, stretching like she had just had the most exhausting day. Then she smiled at me, that soft, practiced smile she had given me 1,000 times before, the one that had once made me feel loved but now felt like a mockery of everything we had built together. She had no idea that the world she had so carefully constructed was about to come crashing down around her. I had spent the past 24 hours thinking about how I wanted this to go. I had debated confronting her immediately, demanding answers, forcing her to admit what she had done. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that wasn't enough. If I confronted her too soon, she would find a way to twist the story. She would turn herself into the victim, make excuses, cry, beg for forgiveness, say whatever she needed to say to manipulate the situation in her favor. I wasn't going to give her that opportunity. I was going to make her confess without even realizing she was doing it. That night, I started laying the trap. I acted like everything was normal, like I had bought her story without question. I asked her about her plans for the next day, pretending to be casually interested, like I wasn't already anticipating the next excuse she would give me. She told me she had another busy day planned, more errands, more plans with friends. I nodded, made a mental note of the time frame, and kept my mouth shut. That I knew exactly what she was going to do, and I was going to catch her in the act. The next morning, I left for work at my usual time, kissed her goodbye like always, and walked out the door. But I didn't go to work. Instead, I parked down the street and waited. It didn't take long. Barely an hour later, she left the house, dressed up just like before, phone in hand, calling for her ride. I followed. Again. But this time, I wasn't just going to sit in my car and watch from a distance. This time, I was going to make sure she saw me. She took an Uber. Of course, she did. But I had anticipated that. I had already pulled up the app on my phone and checked my ride history, knowing that I could find out exactly where she was going the moment the charge appeared on our account, and there it was, the same address, the same apartment, the same place she had been sneaking off to for who knows how long, that I followed, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly I thought I might break it. My heart was pounding, not with fear, not with sadness, but with a quiet, simmering rage that had been building for weeks. I was done pretending. I was done being the fool. She arrived at the apartment complex, and I watched as she got out of the car, smoothed out her clothes, and walked inside like she had done so many times before. But this time, she wasn't going to come out to find an Uber waiting for her. This time, she was going to find me. I parked nearby and waited. I wasn't just going to bust in there like some jealous husband on a rampage. No, I was going to wait until she thought she was safe. I was going to give her time to get comfortable, to relax, to think she had gotten away with it yet again, and then I was going to rip her world apart. An hour passed. Then too. I sat there, staring at the building, knowing exactly what was happening behind those walls. Knowing that my wife, the woman I had trusted, the woman I had built a life with, was in there with another man, doing things I couldn't even let myself think about. Finally, the door opened, she stepped out first, her hair slightly messy, her clothes just a little out of place, the same way she had looked when she came home every other time. She was texting someone, probably him, probably making plans for the next time they would see each other, and then, right behind her, he walked out, the Uber driver, the man who had been right in front of me this whole time, the man who had been picking her up, taking her away, dropping her off at our house like he wasn't actively helping her destroy our marriage. I watched as they said their goodbyes, as she smiled at him, as he gave her a look that made my blood boil. And then, just as she turned around to head for her next ride home, I stepped out of my car. I made sure she saw me, and the second she did, her entire face changed. She froze in place, her eyes wide, her phone slipping slightly in her hand. The color drained from her face as she realized exactly what had just happened. She had been caught, and there was no way out this time. The second Rachel saw me standing there, everything about her changed. It was as if I had ripped the air out of her lungs. She froze mid-step, her body stiffening, her fingers tightening around her phone like she was trying to hold on to something real, something solid, something that could ground her in the face of what was happening. Her expression flickered between emotions: shock, panic, denial, all in the span of a few seconds. She wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't expecting to get caught. She had gotten so comfortable in her deception, so confident that she had covered her tracks, that the reality of the situation was hitting her like a freight train. I stayed still, just watching her. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to do anything. My presence alone was enough. She knew exactly why I was here. She knew exactly what I had seen. And for the first time in who knows how long, she had no excuse ready, no well-crafted lie, no manipulation to throw at me. She was completely exposed. Then, just when I thought she might say something, she did what I least expected. She turned her head slightly, glancing over at him, the Uber driver, the man who had been part of this secret life she had been living behind my back. He had been standing behind her, watching this unfold with a mix of confusion and caution. He wasn't panicked like she was. He wasn't frozen in place. He was watching me carefully, trying to assess whether or not I was a threat. I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was waiting to see what I would do. Maybe he expected me to charge at him, throw a punch, scream, cause a scene. Maybe that's what he was used to from husbands who found out the truth. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. I wasn't going to make this easier for either of them. Rachel finally snapped out of it and took a step toward me, but she hesitated. She looked like she was about to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't sorry, she wasn't guilty, she was caught. That was all this was to her. She wasn't devastated about what she had done. She wasn't heartbroken over what this meant for our marriage. She was just scrambling, her mind racing, trying to find a way to salvage the situation, to somehow turn this around, to make herself the victim, to make me the bad guy, but there was no way out of this. I had followed her. I had seen everything with my own eyes. I knew where she had been. I knew what she had been doing. I knew who she had been doing it with. There were no half-truths, no misunderstandings, no technicalities she could use to manipulate the situation. Still, she tried. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and then did exactly what I expected. She tried to act like nothing had happened. She forced a confused look onto her face, tilting her head slightly like she couldn't believe I was here, like I was the one acting irrationally. She was about to speak when I raised a hand, stopping her before she could even start. I wasn't interested in whatever excuse she had planned. I wasn't going to give her the chance to twist this, to try and rewrite the story in her favor. She faltered, caught off guard by my silence, by my refusal to engage in the game she was so used to playing. I could see the frustration building in her eyes, the way her jaw clenched slightly, the way her fingers twitched against her phone. She was waiting for me to yell, to accuse her, to lash out. But I wasn't going to, because I had already won. That I turned my attention to him. He was still standing there, arms crossed, watching me with that same cautious expression. He was trying to act indifferent, trying to act like he wasn't the reason my marriage was falling apart. But he knew. He knew exactly what this was. He had been around long enough to understand that his part in this wasn't going to be ignored. For a moment, I considered saying something to him. Something cutting, something that would stay with him long after I walked away. But I realized I didn't need to. He wasn't important. Rachel had made her choice, and now, I was making mine. That I looked back at her one last time, taking in the sight of the woman I had once loved, the woman I had built a life with, the woman who had thrown it all away for this. Then I turned and walked away. She called my name, but I didn't stop. She took a step forward, like she might try to come after me. But she hesitated because she knew there was nothing left to say. She knew that for the first time since this whole thing started, she wasn't the one in control. She had spent so much time lying, so much time manipulating, so much time convincing herself that she could do whatever she wanted and never face the consequences. But now, she was the one left standing in shock. She was the one realizing that she had lost everything, and I wasn't going to be there to pick up the pieces. That I got in my car, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Rachel had spent so much time making her choice, and now, I had finally made mine, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. I drove without a destination. I just needed to get away. The weight of everything settled in my chest like a stone, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. I had imagined this moment in my head over and over again, catching her, confronting her, watching the truth unravel in real time. But none of it prepared me for the actual moment, for the raw, unbearable finality of it all. Rachel had spent months lying to me, sneaking around, creating this second life that had nothing to do with the marriage we had built together. She had stood in front of me, looking me in the eyes, and chosen to betray me again and again. And now, standing outside that apartment, caught in the act, she hadn't broken down. She hadn't begged for forgiveness. She hadn't even tried to salvage what was left of us. She had just watched me walk away. I don't know how long I drove before I finally pulled into a parking lot. It was a random gas station, nearly empty, just a flickering neon sign casting an eerie glow on the pavement. I turned off the engine, sat there gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. There was no going back from this. No fixing it. Rachel and I were over. The thought should have crushed me, but instead, all I felt was exhaustion. The kind that seeps into your bones, the kind that doesn't go away no matter how much you try to shake it off. I had been holding on to something that had already been dead for a long time. She had checked out of this marriage months ago, maybe even longer. I had just been too blind to see it. That I pulled out my phone and stared at it, debating my next move. I had 100 messages I wanted to send her, 100 things I wanted to say. But what was the point? She had already told me everything I needed to know without saying a word. Instead, I sent a message to my lawyer. It was short. Just one sentence: I need to start the divorce process. It felt strange to see the words typed out in front of me. Divorce. A word that had never once entered my mind until now. I had married Rachel thinking it was forever. I had never even considered the possibility of our life together ending like this, but now, it was the only option. That I wasn't going to be one of those men who let themselves be humiliated, who stayed with someone who had no respect for them. I wasn't going to let her gaslight me into thinking that this was something we could work through. She had made her choice, and now, I was making mine. That I turned off my phone and just sat there, staring into the night. The silence felt heavier than it ever had before. For the first time in a long time, I had nothing left to lose. That I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. The idea of stepping into that house, into the space we had shared, into the bed where she had probably laid thinking about him, made my skin crawl. I checked into a hotel instead. The room was small, impersonal, with stiff sheets and an air conditioner that hummed too loudly. But it didn't matter. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything over and over again. The way she had looked at me when I caught her. The way she had glanced at him before speaking. The way she had stood there, waiting for me to react, as if she still thought she could control the situation. That I had done the right thing by walking away. I knew that. But it didn't make the pain any easier to bear, because no matter how much I hated her in that moment, a part of me still remembered the woman I had married. The woman who had once made me laugh, who had once looked at me like I was the only person in the world. That I closed my eyes, trying to block it all out. But the memories were relentless. That I remembered the way she used to rest her head on my shoulder during movie nights. The way she used to text me silly jokes in the middle of the day just to make me smile. The way she had held my hand at our wedding, looking at me with tears in her eyes, promising me forever. And now, forever was nothing more than a cruel joke. That I should have seen the signs earlier. I should have listened to my gut when things first started feeling off. I should have confronted her the moment I saw those Uber rides piling up, the moment I noticed her pulling away. But I had been too trusting. Too naive. I had believed in us, even when she had stopped believing in me. The thought made my jaw clench. That I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I had spent too much time fighting for a marriage that had already been lost. Now, it was time to fight for myself. That I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages. Rachel hadn't texted me. No apology. No explanation. No desperate attempt to fix things. Maybe she was still in shock, still trying to figure out what her next move was. Or maybe she just didn't care enough to reach out. Either way, it didn't matter. That I wasn't waiting for her anymore. That I wasn't playing her game. That I wasn't going to be the fool she had assumed I was. That I typed out one final message and sent it to her. You don't have to come home. I'll have the papers ready soon. I didn't wait for a response. That I didn't care what she had to say. This was the end of us, and for the first time in months, I felt free. Rachel never responded to my message. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not at all. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. There was nothing left for her to say. No lie that could undo what had happened. No excuse that could make me change my mind. She had spent months disrespecting our marriage, and now, she was realizing that I wasn't going to be another one of her mistakes that she could smooth over with a few well-placed words. That I went home the next day, but not to see her. I went to collect my things, to pack up what I needed before starting over somewhere else. The house felt different now, empty, like a place that no longer belonged to me. Her perfume still lingered in the air, but instead of feeling familiar, it felt foreign. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just done. She wasn't there when I arrived. Maybe she was too ashamed to face me. Maybe she was with him. It didn't matter. I packed my bags, gathered the essentials, and left the keys on the kitchen counter. By the end of the week, the divorce papers were in motion. Rachel tried reaching out once, a short, pitiful text that simply read, "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. There was nothing left to talk about. She had made her choice, and now, I was making mine. I walked away from that marriage without looking back, and I never regretted it.